Hello, and welcome to another episode of Breaking the Guard. On today's episode, I'm going to talk about the phenomenon known as being gun shy, right? Where you can see a fighter has a hard time pulling the trigger and they're very tentative. So everything is like half stepped. They don't really fire as many strikes as they normally do, they don't go for as many takedowns, and they kind of just let the loss happen to them. And you might wonder from the outside, what the hell's going on here? Like, just punch the guy. And it sounds very simple from the outside, but from the fighter standpoint, it is very difficult. For example, just yesterday we had UFC 313, got Ankalaev with Pereira, and if you don't want to hear spoilers, you could turn it off right now. Right? Well, I won't even spoil it for you. I'll just say the fighter who lost was claimed to be very gun shy and much more tentative than they normally are, right? And then you might think, well, what makes it happen? For one, usually it's fear, right? You're afraid of something going wrong, right? Where maybe you went for, let's say, a jab, and on the first time you threw that jab, this guy slipped and ripped you with a right hand, boom, and you know, and hit you pretty hard. Now you might be a little gun shy because you're like, man, the first time I threw a jab, he really let me have it. I don't want to throw that jab anymore, right? But like your strategy may have been throwing the jab a lot, and all of a sudden it was just shown that that's not a good strategy, and you might have a hard time shifting, especially if you didn't set up multiple game plans like I talked about previously. As a result, now you're kind of, well, you're frozen because you don't want to execute your game plan, but you also don't have anything else available. This will make you very gun shy because now doing nothing seems better than doing something, right? Because you know the something could lead to you getting ripped with a right hand, while doing nothing seems like less risky, right? You're not exposing yourself as much, so to speak. So that's one tendency of being gun shy. Uh, you're worried about, you have fear of the consequences of your actions, right? And I mean, primarily that's usually what it is. Sometimes it's also kind of on the same grounds, but maybe slightly different. It's just a confidence issue, right? If you don't feel very confident in your abilities, or something has happened to make you doubt your abilities and your confidence drops, all of a sudden now you don't feel like you can throw that, right? Maybe in previous fights you were the predominant striker and now you're fighting one of the best strikers ever, even when the strategy wasn't disproven, right? Like he didn't rip you or anything like that, but like in your head you can see it, man, like I might not be able to pull this off of this guy. And you could see this happen quite a lot, especially when you're training, right? At least for me, I'm a black belt. I've been, training for almost 30 years now. So more often than not, I'm training with people who are much less skilled than I am. And when they go to grapple me, a lot of them are like, they're very scared to do anything, because especially when it's Kimura related, because like, oh, this, I'm the Kimura master, this and that. Like, it's obviously not going to work on him, right? So they don't even try to do anything flashy or even what they would consider to be my expertise, because they figure I know all the ins and outs of it. And that is just another form of being gun shy, right? Like you're not playing your game because you lack the confidence to play it, right? So I would say those are probably the two that we can boil it down to. You're either afraid of something happening because something already did happen once and now you don't want to have to relive that, or you have a confidence issue and your lack of confidence is causing you not to really commit to anything. Both of these are big problems, and if you're not able to overcome them, it can cost you the fight. Uh, you're also going to lose quite a bit of fans because everybody hates to see somebody who just doesn't launch, right? Uh, and I'm sure you can recount many people in MMA history that have done this and they get booed. So let's talk about how you're going to address this. One, being afraid. Everything in fighting has a risk. That's for certain. Even the greatest plans and strategies from the greatest athletes can fail and can be countered. And sometimes these can end in disastrous fashion for yourself. But that's life, right? And you have to be able to take chances if you're going to try to win. This doesn't mean if you have some tactic or some technical motion that you're doing that has been shown to end up in a disaster to keep repeating it and ignore the fear. If the fear is valid, for example, maybe when I went to shoot a double leg, the guy was able to stuff my head in and drop into a guillotine and I barely survived. And I escaped. Maybe it's not advisable for me to go for that shot again. Do I have another form of a takedown that I can execute? Right? Especially if it happened twice in a row. Maybe I shot a second time and the same type of result happened. I'm like, well, clearly there's something wrong with my shot technique, or his shot defense is so great that like he's pulling me into this guillotine every time, and I'm ending up losing the exchange. This is when the fear is, I would say, is valid, which is, yeah, like we're replicating the same result over and over again. It would be insane to continue to repeat it. But this is why I tell people have multiple game plans. Because if you only had one, you're not going to be gun shy, and it's not necessarily even like bad that you were gun shy. It's that you came in with a bad game plan, right? It would be kind of like if I brought like a BB gun to hunt a rhino. Yeah, I'm probably going to be shy to shoot it because it's not effective and I might just piss it off more, right? Like I'm better just not doing anything and hoping the rhino doesn't notice me, right? So it's kind of the same deal if you have a bad game plan and you didn't have anything else to bring to the table. You're like, well, I better just not do anything and hope that he makes a mistake, right? And that's obviously not a great strategy. So if you feel that you do have a valid concern or fear about your game plan, this is when you need to be able to shift in your game plans. I had recently been able to watch my grappling matches in the Ultimate Submission Showdown. They had actually finally released it on, I think it's Tubi.tv, like TUBI.tv. I'll post a link to it later on because I'm going to review my matches and do breakdowns. But in my match with Travis Lutter, I initially had the game plan of pulling guard. And there was a reasoning behind that, which was they had a weird rule set, but not to get too deep into it. If you were able to control your guard for the 3 minutes, you would get a point in the reverse. So I wanted to game this system because it was a first to 12 points to win. I'm like, I'm going to score the first point by pulling guard. And that worked. I scored the first point. However, in his turn to play guard, he just stood up and he didn't want me to play on top. So I'm like, oh, I'll pull guard again and I'll score another point. I could technically beat him just by playing bottom, right? Even though I'm not able to sweep or submit him. But on the second time around rather, he was able to pass my guard. And then he scored a guard pass. And then I was able to recover, and then he passed again. And then I recovered, he passed again. Like he clearly exploited a weakness in my guard at the time. And it took me 3 of them to realize if I let him pass one more time, the match is over. So I was able to then, I had a fear now, like this guy can pass my guard, right? If I keep playing the bottom game, I'm going to lose. So I changed my strategy entirely, which is now I'm going to wrestle with him and I'm not conceding bottom position at any cost. That changed the whole match. The match went from him slicing through my guard to now we had this battle for top position. And the match went like another 12 minutes or something like that after I made that decision. So that is the value of being able to shift strategically. This is hard for a lot of athletes to do because normally when you're in a training camp, your coach and you convene, he watches and studies tape, and then he figures out what is the best way for you to win. And typically a coach is only working on one game plan with you because this is their best estimation of what's the best path to victory. If they don't set up contingency plans, like, okay, like this is what we think is going to be the best game plan, but just in case we have this reserve game plan B. And if you're thinking more like me, then there's also a game plan C, right? But at the very least, having two, if you're not going to have just one, at least have two. Because fighters usually have a difficult time switching because by our nature, we have a lot of perseverance and we tend to be stubborn. And these are normally admirable traits, right? Like we want fighters to be able to, even in the face of adversity and lots of resistance, to continue to persevere and let their will overcome the opposition. But that doesn't always work. And this is when your stubbornness can work against you because if you don't shift your game plan, you know what, I'm just going to keep doing the same thing because this is what we train, has to work. You're not going to force that square peg into the circle hole, right? So you're just going to get clobbered, right? Or worse, you might realize it's not going in and then you just do nothing. And that's when you become gun shy. So in my belief, we need to shift strategy. When you see a fighter has become gun shy and it's for a valid reason, we need to shift strategy. We need to, okay, let's work on plan B now, or maybe even plan C, because you're not obviously not comfortable executing plan A. If it's not fear, it's lack of confidence, then we need to instill urgency and boost up our athlete, right? Because somebody who lacks confidence, they need to be woken up, right? This is a little more difficult to coach because every athlete's different. The psychology for every person is different. I was just talking about this to my wife the other day. Some people need to be smacked around, right? You need like aggressive push to get them to really amp up. Some people just need calm, assertive voice to get them to where they need to be, right? So it just depends on the athlete. And as being the coach, that's part of knowing your athlete. You have to understand what makes their gears move and how you can get them turning when they're not turning. So somebody who lacks confidence is like the game plan sound, is just that he's not executing it and he's kind of stuck, right? Like I said, he's this failure to launch. He's just there and kind of hoping for mistakes for him to capitalize on. And he's just sticking in the fight rather than fighting the fight. You need to get them, you need to give them that confidence. You need to give them that push. You need to create that urgency in them in order for them to win. And that might be simple as telling them, you're losing this fight. You need to, go in there and you need to bring the fight to him. It might be reminding them about their training, remember their past experiences, telling them things that they have done, remember what they're fighting for. Like I said, it's going to vary depending on the athlete's motivations, but you need to tap into their psyche and get them to believe. And even if they don't believe, to get them to believe if they can't believe in themselves, believe in the training, believe in the game plan, right? Like we worked on this for months. Have faith, because we need them to be able to execute. Because short of that, you can't force them to drink water, right? You can lead the horse to water, you can't make it drink. So it's the same type of deal. So this is the part of being a coach that is stressful, is when your player is not responding to the commands that you're giving it, you're kind of helpless. And this is why, like I said, it's important to understand your athlete, what their motivations are, what are trigger words. And these are things that you should be reviewing them in advance, right? The type of cue words that you have that fire certain signals in them. If you have a particular name for a combination or for a technique, and you say that, ideally, that's when they execute said movement, pattern, or technique. When you rehearse these things in advance, it makes it easier for them to respond, especially if you have a high trust situation where the athlete is very trusting of the coach. In the case of my brother and I always had very high trust, and if he said something, I was doing it. And that's usually the best way these things work, right? If you don't have good trust, then that's a big problem, because now, even when you're telling the athlete to do certain things, if they don't trust it, they're not going to do it. So they're just going to stay in being very gun shy. So, in my opinion, if you're a fighter, if you don't have a high trust for your coach, you probably shouldn't have that person as a coach. And that's not to say it's the coach's fault. It's just, for whatever reason, there's a lack of trust. It's not going to really work out well, right? You need to be able to have full faith in whatever the coaching staff is telling you, because that's going to put them in the best position to help you. Because otherwise, those people in the corner are just a distraction then, if they're not saying things that make sense to you. Because you have to remember, as the athlete, they are a third or a second set of eyes, really. And then if you have 2 or 3 cornermen, you have a fourth and fifth set of eyes that are seeing things that you're not able to see. And if you can't find the benefit of those, that's a problem. Now, I always tell athletes, regardless, like, whatever I say is, in my opinion, what you should do. But as the athlete, of course, you always have the option of following it or not. And it's not taboo to dismiss one idea, but accept like 8 or 9 other ones, right? But if everything I say you completely ignore, obviously that's problematic, because now I'm a distraction rather than being an asset to you, and we're not working for each other, right? But if I say 10 things and you do 8 of them, 80% acceptance rate, that means I helped you 80% of the time. That's admirable. That's good, right? So that's another aspect of this as well, because sometimes in the heat of battle, people forget the game plan, especially if you've been knocked around the head a few times and you're starting to get tired. The coach is there to help you reinforce the game plan, be that second brain for you, and help push those ideas in. So sometimes maybe you're not so much gun shy as you're freaking brain dead, and you need someone to put in ideas for you. But if you don't have trust in your coaches, that's not going to work. So to me, those are external factors that we can execute from a coaching perspective, right? Which is, I can work on multiple game plans and be able to cue my athlete to switch game plans if necessary. If there's a confidence issue, we need to be able to build confidence or instill faith in the game plan and have the athlete work on those. As an athlete themselves, if you are feeling like you're second guessing yourself the entire time, you need to rally yourself. And rather than rely on someone trying to help you like your coach, instill belief in yourself and say, I can do this. I've trained hard for this. I've done all the right preparation. Have the best training in the world. I can come out here. I can win. I can enforce my game plan, right? And I believe in myself and my abilities. I believe in my coaches. I believe in my game plan, and I'm going to try to execute, right? And rather remove that, scratch that. I'm not going to try. I am going to execute, right? I always tell people, trying implies failure. We're doing, right? You're actually doing it, right? You're trying. It says, well, I might work, I might what. When I do something, it's working, right? So that's important. You have to have that stubbornness in yourself. Like I said, this sometimes is a dual-edged sword here, but if you're gun shy, you want to be stubborn and go for something. And if it's not working, then we have to be able to shift, be able to recognize. Again, don't rely on your coaches to. It's good if they recognize it and are able to cue you off a game plan, but it's better ideally if you can recognize it yourself. Like after one go, like, oh, this is not working. I need to shift to game plan B, right? My shots are not working. I need to switch to upper body clinches, right? Or like that jab is not coming through clean. I need better footwork or better feints before I initiate. So as a fighter, we need these things, and we should be working on our confidence outside of the fight so that when we get in the fight, it's already high level. And this is where positive affirmations work, journaling, doing visualizations. We should have our confidence level very high by the time we step in there. Whenever I have athletes that were being prepared for a fight or for a match, the main thing I tell them is as long as you do everything properly in training and you do all the proper preparations and you eat clean, you sleep well, you're doing the mental work, you're doing your visualizations, being nervous, being anxious, that's part of the process, that's part of your body, getting yourself ready for combat. But just know that the moment we step into the cage or we step on into the mats, that all that work that you did is going to dial in at that very moment. And all the anxiety and the nerves and maybe even the second guessing are going to disappear because the moment you step on, you know it's time. And this is what the past 3 months have been about, right? And whatever may have felt off is going to feel on because there's no more running away. Because understand that your body and your mind can be a coward, right? Like it doesn't want to fight, right? It understands there's considerable risk in fighting. And that's why if you watch people in street altercations, there's a lot of taunting words, shoving, posturing. We're showing a bravado of force in hopes that our opponent is going to de-escalate and back away, right? If you really wanted to fight, you wouldn't say anything. I would just swing on you. So when people are talking to each other before a fight, it's because they don't want to fight. Now men typically, they puff up, talk big, just like animals do when they stand up and they try to look as big as they can to try to scare the other person away. And then usually what happens, the other person will try to mirror and until a point where if neither person backs down, that's when the fight happens. But if they really wanted to fight, it's very simple. If I see someone I want to fight, I'm just going to walk up to them and swing on them, right? That's how you get the fight started. Everything else before is an attempt of de-escalation, right? So your body is constantly going to try to find a way out. But there's a certain point where it knows it's a point of no return, right? And in my opinion, that is when you step on the mats, right? Or that's when you enter the cage. Because once you're in there, there's no going back. And at that point, that's where I find, at least for myself, if there was any hesitancy or timidness or, all those feelings disappear. Because now my body knows, okay, it's time to get serious, right? So I always found that reassuring, and that's always worked for me. That once I stepped in there, I felt the best I've ever felt. I could have had times I've come in and I've had just about all my pro fights, I had an injury of some sort, either a separated shoulder, a knee injury, popped ribs. Like I was not fortunate in that regard. And you would never know it when I competed because body is like, okay, we don't need to feel this right now, right? It's not going to help us here. Clearly, I'm going into combat. I need to just get everything dialed in and ignore most of the pain signals. So that type of work I feel is helpful for getting yourself dialed in. And if you're doing a lot of mental prep, I feel you're gonna have much less time, much less concern of being overly fearful or not having confidence. Now, I will say one other aspect of this that I didn't consider, but I just reminded myself now, is overthinking. And this is also part of being gun shy. And I think it's somewhat similar to either lack of confidence or being fearful. But I guess just in case different words reach different people, and you might be overthinking during your fight, right? Where I'm fighting, I'm here, and I'm like, okay, in my head, like I need to throw this 1-2, but okay, do I throw it now? He's moving forward, he's moving back, and now you're caught in this paralysis of analysis, right? Where you're trying to think of what to do, and thinking and fighting don't go well together, right? Thinking is a very slow and clumsy process. Thinking is done outside the cage by the coaches. When you're fighting, it's generally advisable to flow, right? You want to be in the zone. That's what I was talking about, entering the cage. I get into a flow state where now I'm just reacting. I'm going through the game plan. I'm not actively thinking. I might have flashes of thoughts or ideas in my head that allows me to execute moves, but it's not so much that I'm analyzing like the positions of each thing and thinking what are the best options here. Like no, it's just flowing, right? The only times where thinking usually come into play in combat is when you're stuck. And that's not a good thing. That typically means you are not prepared for that particular situation and you have to think your way out of it. Just like if you're go back to grade school and you think of a test problem that you weren't prepared for, and then you have to try to think your way through it. I know for me, like I think back to college, I mean like calculus 3, and I encounter a problem that I don't understand or I can't instantly recall the formula I need. So now I'm like thinking, crap, okay, how do I piece this together? What's the formula I need? You know, is this, and that is slow versus when I recognize a problem and I know the format and the formula, okay, it's just processing, right? I'm just flowing. So ideally when we're fighting, we're flowing. But if you find that if you're in a fight and you're thinking a lot, the best way I feel to override that is just to take actions, right? I believe my brother took this quote from, God, I forget the name of the book now, but it's active mind, still body, still mind, active body, right? So if your mind's very active, chances are you're not moving as much, right? Because you're using a lot of resources to think. Whereas when your body is moving a lot, your mind tends to be stiller because you're focusing on all these different motions. Excuse me. So if you are gun shy because you're overthinking, chances are that's probably why you're not moving a lot, because you're moving too much in your head rather than in your physical body. So if you find that the case and you're having a hard time, because obviously it's not easy to go stop thinking. That doesn't usually work because you're still thinking to say that, right? Just be proactive and start moving more, right? Start throwing out a jab, start throwing your teep, and once you start making connections and he starts firing back, you're going to have to react to counter strikes, and that will generally pull you out of that thinking process because now you're having to flow to be able to react to the fight. And especially if you remember what the game plan is, just okay, execute the game plan, right? And start going through it. So maybe it's throw a few jabs and then push the guy into the corner, go to upper body clinch, and then sweep, right? So like just start moving into that game plan, right? Don't think about the perfect time to do it, just start doing it. And that can help get you out of an overthinking process. So 3 different ways where gun shyness can play a role that at least I identified in this video, which is 1, being fearful, 2, lack of confidence, 3, overthinking. And hopefully I've addressed those enough to give you some insights on how you can deal with it. If you do have some issues with this and you feel like I missed something that could be helpful for you, feel free to let me know and I can expand on this a bit more. But I think for the majority of people, that would probably cover, like I said, at least like 80 to 90% of what people experience when they're gun shy.